Hello everyone, I'm Dan Christie, one of the instructors here at the Tech Academy, and this video will be the introduction to JavaScript. So let's go ahead and get started. So one of the basics, as with all languages, are data types. So let's take a moment to explain briefly about data types. In JavaScript can use a data type known as string value. A string value is simply a bunch of characters put together in between two quotation marks. There's the numeric value, and that of course is just dealing with raw numbers. They're not strings, they're actually numbers. You can actually apply mathematical functions to them. Then there's going to be what's called Boolean, which is like a true or a false. And an array is basically a grouping of like values put together in different segments that you have to actually iterate through that array to grab each of those values. And then there's the null object, which is implicitly stated and used in advanced situations. And then there's what's called undefined. And that's simply a situation where JavaScript hasn't been told what the value is. It doesn't know necessarily what it is. It knows it's a variable, and it knows it contains something that's undefined. So another essential aspect of JavaScript and most programming languages is going to be the variable. A variable can be thought of as a container. It's a container that allows you to store information within it. Later on, you could access that information back out of that container to use it further on in your program. Now this container, this variable if you will, is simply a marker to the location in the computer's memory where that data is actually stored. So it serves as a reference point. Now that you have named a variable, you can simply call that variable name, and at that point JavaScript already knows where the information's been stored in the computer's memory and can pull that information that's associated with that variable. And one of the absolutely essential aspects of JavaScript to understand is that JavaScript is an interpreted language. And what this means is that it requires a special software to read and interpret its instructions and to carry out those instructions. One popular piece of software that already comes pre-equipped as an interpreter is the web browser. So most web browsers already come pre-equipped with all the essential files necessary, the runtime files, the assisting files that are needed in order to interpret JavaScript and then perform and carry out its instructions. So let's follow along in these next steps and we'll learn more about the basics of JavaScript. Go ahead and pull up your web browser. I will be using Google Chrome. If you have Google Chrome, I definitely recommend that. That way at least our setup will look the same. So another thing to learn or understand is called a REPL. Read Eval Print Loop. REPL. And what that means is it's a specialized software such as an interpreter that can read JavaScript instructions and as well as other languages, and it's basically an environment where you can actually actively run through your code and then test it out and see the results immediately on the screen. This software I have on my screen right now is a REPL that I had built, and I was actually influenced heavily by the Try It editor, which comes from W3 Schools. This is their Try It editor, and we can use this going forward with future videos. I just want to make sure I just gave you a brief introduction of what this is. But for now, all we need is our browser. We're just going to go over here to this ellipsis or your setup button, depending on what type of browser you're using. Usually there's like some sort of setup, some sort of feature that's like this. So in the Google Chrome, we have this ellipsis. You'll want to click on that and go down to More Tools, and we want to go to Developer Tools. That pulls up what's called a console. Almost all browsers have what's called a console, and a console already has its own REPL built in. So you can actually sit here and type in code in this line by line and press enter, and it will show the corresponding results directly below it. And that's what we're going to be using right now to go briefly through the basics of JavaScript. Later on in future videos, we'll get more advanced and we'll write our own scripting over here in this REPL and then test it out and see the results here. But for now, we're just going to do line by line here in the console. And like I said, it doesn't matter if you have this REPL open, as long as you open up a browser, go to its settings, find the developer tools, in some location they'll have a console, and open up your browser's console. If you need to, research your particular brand of browser for where the developer console is. All right, let's go ahead and get busy. All right, we're going to discuss variables. So variables is like a package where you can actually store information into it, and it is a reference to the point in the computer's memory where that actual data is being stored, and you can access it all throughout the lifetime of your program. In JavaScript, to declare a variable, you have to use the keyword var. Var tells JavaScript, I'm about to give a name, and that will serve as a variable. So now let's go ahead and give a name. Let's just say name. Then we can do equals. This is how you assign a value to a variable. I'm going to give it a string. So we're declaring that we're going to create a variable. We give it a variable name. When you're using variable names, you got to make sure that you follow and adhere to specific naming conventions. There are reserved keywords that you can't go and do. You can't put a number in front of the letters. You gotta kind of follow suit. So there are some specific rules you want to read up for declaring variables and what can be a variable name. So we've got var name. And it's good to give your naming convention for a variable. It's good to use names that are going to be more intuitive to you. So if I was going to put a string that I wanted to be for someone's name, it'd be a good idea to call this a name. And then in fact, F name if it was going to be the first name, and L name if it was the last name. And in that way, later on, when I come back to my software and I look at this variable, I'll better guess what was actually in that variable. I could have also done str_name. Then I know that the data type within my variable name is a string. And that will help me, say I come back a year from now, I won't have to chase around my variables and try and figure out what they meant, what type of data was in them. So naming convention is an art, and definitely you'll get better and better at it as you practice. So to put something in this name, to assign it a value, you'll use an equal sign, and then you'll give it two quotes and something to put in it, or if it was numeric, I would use no quotes and just put a number. See how it comes up blue? That denotes that it's a numeric value. It can now use it to do mathematical operations to that variable if I needed. So the double quote, Bob, that comes up in red here, so it's telling me it sees it as a string value. So if I had a number in between here, say I did the 8 like that, it's between the double quotes, it's also in red and not in blue, so it's not being recognized as a number. It's not numeric, it's string at this point. It's not appropriate to do mathematical functions with this. So understanding the different types of data types will help you out as you go forward. But this is the basic concept for creating a variable and storing a value into that variable. And now name is the placeholder to the place in memory where this string is being stored. I'm going to change it back to Bob, and I am going to call it fname. Var fname equals Bob. Now if you press enter, now if we were to type fname, it will give us the value that's stored for fname. Press enter, Bob. When you're dealing with languages, you usually write your code line by line, and that's considered a statement. And right here, var fname equals, and we gave it a value, you end your statement in JavaScript with a semicolon. That would be proper. That allows us to have another command afterwards, and it doesn't interfere or get interfered by the previous command, because we've told it that this statement here is complete. And now we can move on to the next statement. And again, we would complete it with a semicolon, and likewise as you go throughout your code. That would be proper. So now let's go ahead. Let's declare another value. We'll call it lname equals Jones. There you go. So of course lname, type that in, press enter, Jones. So now we get to concatenation. Concatenation is where you can take string values and numeric values and you can make them tie together. Say you want to make a sentence. Say I wanted to use first name, last name together. I would use what's called concatenation. So I would combine two strings together. And this is how I would do that. So this is going to take the value within f name and combine it to the value within L name. Now note that there's no spaces. Even though I have a space here and here, it doesn't matter. The functionality is a variable concatenate, we're using the plus, and the second variable. As soon as I press enter, I'm going to get Bob Jones together. Now, you can format this by simply, after the first plus, use a quote, space it, and a second quote, and then the plus. So now I've concatenated an empty space here. Because again, two quotes denotes a string. So I gave it a string with a empty character. So f name concatenated to an empty character, concatenated to the last name, produces Bob space Jones. So this is something that you'll want to practice when you're concatenating to make sure you're doing it appropriately, because it can produce unintended results or errors if you don't do it correctly. So now we can go ahead and see this with numeric values. Let's do var num for number, and let's give it a value. I'll say 1. Notice I'm not using quotes for the 1. It is being recognized in blue. It's letting me know, I know that it's a numeric value and not a string. Press enter. And now let's var num2 and let's give it a 4. We'll end our statement, press enter. Again, it's numeric. So now JavaScript can work mathematical functionality to these, so we can do that. If we do the same type of situation where we do num plus num2, now it's no longer going to count this as a concatenation because we're not concatenating two strings. We are actually telling it an operator of addition. So we're saying take the value, the numeric value stored in num, and add it to the numeric value stored in num2. 1 plus 4, which we should get 5. So we'll press enter, we get 5. So this is another thing to watch for when you're working with your variables, that you understand your variable types and that you understand the difference between concatenation and performing addition. So another thing would be the array. An array, again, is a grouping of different values put together, and that becomes an object, and we have to actually unpack it to access the individual sections of that group. So let's go ahead. To declare an array, we would use var again. We'll give it a name. I'm calling it number array. This camel casing is what this is called when you do one word followed by a capital letter and then the rest of that second word. So number array, and that tells me that I'm going to be having a number values or numeric values within this variable in an array. Just helps me going forward. Equals, and let's go ahead and give it some values. So now you'll use an open bracket and a close bracket. I'm going to end my statement, and in between those brackets I'm going to give some values. Since these are numbers, we're not using quotes, but you do separate your values. So again, they're groupings of separate values, kind of like a list. To separate will be a comma. So I've got a 2, I've got a 3, a 6, a 7, 11, and a 4. So this is an array. It's multiple values stored within this array that I've named number array. So I'll press enter. Now if I were to type in number array, I'm going to get exactly all of each of those values that are in it. And there you go. And see how they are separated? So it does understand that. So when you're dealing with arrays, each of these places are indexed. The first index starts at 0. second one is 1, third one is 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. This array contains 6 different values. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember, we're starting at a 0, so don't let that confuse you. Even though I just counted starting with a 1 here for how many items are in here, you still got to remember to access these values. You got to know what their indexes are. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And since index stops at 5, that confuses the novice programmer to believe that, oh wait, there's only 5 items in here because I counted 5. So just remember, you're starting at 0, which is a 1. So there's 6 items in here, and you can find out by using a special built-in method, number array, followed by a period. So to call its method, we would say length, so number length. We're saying this object dot length. So it's going to go and look at this object and give us a count of how many items are stored in here. So we'll go ahead and press enter. And sure enough, it's 6. So it does know that there's 6 separate items stored together in this array. To access, let's say, this very first thing, we would type in, now you can press arrow up and it will repeat what you last typed in your console. Now it saves time, so arrow up. Now I can backspace to the word and I put an open bracket and I'll put a 0 for the index and a close bracket. And now if I press enter, I'm going to actually grab only the first slice, so the first item with the index of 0. So that should be a 2. So we'll press enter. Sure enough, it's a 2. So this is how you access an item within the object. So if I were to call this object and it gives me this, these are packed within this object, an array object, and I can't actually access those values by just calling this array. I actually have to call the array or object and give it the slice to get the specific value I wanted out of it, or we can do what's called an iteration. We'll do an iteration in just a moment. I'm going to do another couple slices so you can get some practice on that. So arrow up, change this to a 4, press enter, that's 11. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think you've kind of got the point here on how you access this way. So now let's go ahead and iterate. Iteration requires a combination of understanding variables and the length function in order to go through this. So what we're going to do is create a function. And what a function is a block of code that you write with a bunch of instructions that can be interpreted all together to perform a specific task. And you can call on your functions many times throughout your code, and it saves you a lot of time by simply writing that function once, but you could call on it maybe 6 or 7 times throughout the lifetime of your program. And that's why we use functions, to save us a lot of time when we're trying to code. So what we're going to do is create a small little for loop, and then we're going to say var, declaring a variable. I'm going to say I. Typically when you're doing a little count like that, I usually gets used. So var I is my variable name. I'm going to give it a value of 0. So I'm starting it or initializing it at 0. I'm going to end my statement so I can begin a new statement. I'm just going to do it all on one line. The new statement will be the name of the array, number array dot length. So that is the, remember that this will return the count of how many items are in here, which when we did this previously and we wanted to know the length right here, it gave us 6. So this essentially, when we write this, is 6 because we know it is. But what if we didn't know? So you use this and it will count for us and it will get that information. So I can go, well, I is less than the number array dot length. So when I essentially, which is 0 right now, is less than 6, and then at that point we're going to give it another set of instructions. So I'm going to close this one here by doing the semicolon so it knows we can do another statement. And now it's I plus plus. So we're saying I plus 1. When you do two pluses together right like that, that's what you're saying. You're saying take this value and add a 1 into it, which at that point, if I take I, which is currently 0, at the end of this statement, and I add a 1 to it, I is no longer 0. It's now going to be I equals 1. And then we go back through this loop. Is 1 less than 6? If it is, do the instructions that we're going to put under here again. And then add 1 at the end of it, which will make it 2. Do the same thing. And we'll keep doing this while this is true. So while this is true, while I is less than 6, continue to do our instructions. So let's go ahead. We're going to close this. So then we're going to type in a bracket. So open bracket and then close bracket. Now notice these brackets are not the squared brackets like these ones. They actually have little peaks. So that's going to be where we put our instructions after these conditions are true in this statement. So with this for loop, we have a condition. If the condition is true, carry out the instructions within this bracket and then add 1 to I and see if it's true again. And remember this here, this value, number array.length, that's 6 because that's how many items within this object. So as long as I is less than 6, we're going to keep doing this. This is a console, and a console is special or secretive for just the developer's eyes. Normally, the user would not have gone to here in the settings and then pulled up developer tools and then looked in here. So this is for the developer. So you can print to this through a command called console.log, and you would have an open closed parentheses. So console.log, open closed parentheses. What's inside the parentheses is what it will print out to the console. In this case, we're going to print out the number array, and we're going to access each individual index to grab them. So copy this. We're going to put it in between the parentheses because that's what we wanted printed out to the console. And we're going to replace the 0 because the 0, if it iterated each item through here, it would only print out the 0 index, which is 2. So it would just keep doing 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. We don't want that. We want each individual item. So we'll replace the 0 with our I variable because we said I is initialized at 0 at the beginning. While I, so while this condition is true, while I, which is 0, is less than 6, do this, which will print out I slice 0, which is the first index, which is 2, and then add 1 to it. So I will become 1. So now you go through this as I is 1, print out the index of 1, which is the 3, and you keep doing that until you've printed out every single item in here, until we've accessed every single item within this number array object. So let's go ahead and press enter, and you'll see that in action. And there you go. So it's iterated line by line. Each of these were the instructions separately as it iterated through our array. So that's called iterating. And that will be a key process that you'll go through when you write and use JavaScript and store information within arrays. So the last thing we'll cover in this particular video, since you've already seen the for statement, so this is a for loop. This for loop is a conditional statement. And now we'll do one more, which is the if statement. So let's go ahead and declare a new variable. We'll call it variable answer. And we're going to go ahead inside answer. We're going to give it equals, and we'll say yes. And then we'll close the statement. So remember, we put yes inside 2 quotation marks. So we're making it a string. We're denoting it as a string. We'll store that string within inside the variable we declared, which will be our answer. We're just referring to it as answer. It's actually got a string value of yes inside it. And now let's go ahead and apply an if condition. Start with the keyword if, open, close parentheses, and you put your conditions in between the parentheses. So we'll say answer is equal to, and then string yes, and then we're going to give it a condition or code to carry out. And in this case, we will say console. In fact, let's learn a new one. A new one that you can use is called the alert. Alert will be something that you can do within a browser. So it requires a browser to carry out alert, because this is a built-in method for browsers. It will actually print and pull up a little pop-up window, which is the alert window. Open, close parentheses, because again, we're calling this function. And inside it would be what you wanted it to print out in that pop-up window. And we're just going to say print out whatever is the content stored with inside answer. And one thing to also be careful of is this here is a comparison operator, not an equal sign. It's two equals, which means will this equal what this is? It's not saying it's a equal operator such as storing something, saying answer will be equal to this information being put inside it. It's simply saying, is what's already in it, so we're comparing it now, is what's already inside it the same as this that I'm going to compare it with? We could even go further and do a strict comparison, and that's triple. And by doing a strict comparison, you're saying, is not only this the same, do they look the same, but is it also the exact same data type as well? So if this was a numeric value, I want whatever stored in here to be a numeric value and also what it says. You want to make sure you watch that. So we'll go back to just double comparison. So we're saying if answer is equal to yes, which we know it is because right here we told yes to be stored in answer, then at that point we're going to print out what was actually the string that's actually stored inside answer. So we'll press enter. And there it is. It popped up here in a little pop-up window, and it does say yes. And so this is an alert. The other one I showed you is the console.log, which prints out specifically or secretly here in your console. These are two ways of outputs. There are many ways to output information. This is just the basic for this video. So I'm excited to teach you more about JavaScript. I look forward to seeing you in our future videos.